Well, I'm going to start talking about my Taiwan trip and Bhikshuni Ordination. And from the calendar, it looks like I'm scheduled to give 4 talks in the next week. So I think maybe in 4 talks, I'll get through part 1 of what happened. So I'm going to just do it in small chunks so that between the days of giving these talks, I can sort of sort out and maybe reorganize and rewind if it's not quite making sense. So today's talk is going to be getting to Fayan Temple, which is where the ordination took place, and all the things that need to happen in order to get this physical body to that place in Taiwan. So it all started back in September. And one day I was just minding my own business, working in the office, and Venerable children came in and said something like, "I've heard that there's an ordination happening in February. Would you like to go?" And at that point, my mind kind of blew out of my head. And there was a little tsunami that took place. So after I calmed down, I asked her, like, what are the requirements? How does a person go? And she said, well, you just simply apply. Do you want to do it? And I said, well, I think I need to think about it. So I then thought I'd need to think about it for another 10 years. But as you know, Venerable Children doesn't wait around for answers. So I said, you know, there's a retreat coming up. The Chenrezig retreat was just about to happen. So I'd let me think about it over retreat. She said, that's fine, no pressure. So I thought about it, and actually I was quite surprised. Each day when I would think about, going and getting this ordination, there were no obstacles that came up in my mind. And then realizing that the time of death is unknown, I thought, well, maybe, I should get on this offer. Obviously, Venerable Children thinks that I'm ready. It's me that doesn't think I'm ready. So maybe I'll just go for it and apply. So that's how it started. I sent my name to a certain person, and that got the ball rolling. But it's not as simple as that. You just don't say, yes, I'd like to come, and then you buy a plane ticket and you go to the ordination. There's a lot of steps in between. So the next thing that had to happen was the ordination committee at first refused all of us foreigners who applied. And we weren't sure what the reason was, but Venerable Children seemed to think that, having a translator is not an easy person to come up with. And so one of the temples who is critical to this story I'll tell today rounded up a translator, and then everything shifted, and then all of the foreigners were invited to continue with the process of filling out forms. So the next hurdle that came was that at one point they requested that we get a letter of reference from a Chinese master. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I did know that my acharya for my ordination, Venerable Jendi, certainly in my mind seemed like a Chinese master. So I wrote to her right away, and in Venerable Jendi's gracious, very kind manner, she wrote back immediately saying that she would, of course, write a letter of recommendation for me in Chinese. And that got rid of that obstacle. So it was really interesting. The whole time of getting to the ordination was me facing difficulties, having to ask people for help, and seeing the help come immediately. So that was very interesting to notice. So eventually there were more requests for information, and at one point they wanted to know if I was physically well. They didn't ask about mental health, but they asked about physical health. So they wanted a letter from my physician. So my physician is a wonderful person I've known for 25 years. So I contacted him, and I can never speak to him directly. I talked to his assistant, and she eventually said yes, my doctor would be happy to write a letter. And then the letter just kept not coming. And I had to get all this information in on a certain due date. So this is now the week before Christmas, which I think for any physician is just an incredibly busy time. And I kept phoning his assistant Melanie and saying, I kind of need this letter that I'm well for this trip to Taiwan. So she got back to me on December 23rd saying that the letter was coming. And she said, but we have to charge you something. And I said, really? Because, I'm from Alberta, and in Canada healthcare is free. And I thought, wow, I've never paid a penny in my life. What's this about? And she got really serious and she said, it's going to be quite a heavy cost. I thought, well, okay, I've got some savings. And then she said, well, the cost is the physician wants me to pray for him and his family and the assistant. So I said, okay, great, you've got it. So Christmas Eve, I was making prayers for my family physician. So I thought that was pretty cool that he would ask for that as a price. So eventually, and then there's another very important person involved in this whole process. In addition to the translator, Venerable Ruli, the other nun, her name is Venerable Heng Ching. And she's a nun who lives in Taiwan. She is a Buddhist scholar, a Bhikshuni nun, and she met Venerable Chödrön in 1996 at the conference in Bodh Gaya called Life as a Western Nun. And she was very, very encouraging throughout this whole initial process of getting the forms in and making sure I was connecting to the right people. And just a very, very warm-hearted person. So you'll hear more about her as the story evolves as well. So finally, I found out that I was accepted to go. And Venerable Jendi wrote back a very enthusiastic letter. Congratulations, now you've sort of completed part one. I thought that was it. You just get invited and you go. And so what she wrote was very true. This is only the beginning. I'm going to just check my notes here because there's so much to say about the help I got. So then when Venerable Chödrön knew that I was definitely going, she said, well, since you've got some time, why don't you go and visit Venerable Wu Yin? Go before the ceremony takes place. And Venerable Wu Yin is also a very important person to Shrivasti Abbey because she too was at the conference in Bodh Gaya in 1996. Venerable Chödrön, in fact, invited her personally to come to the conference in India to teach the Bhikshuni precepts. And out of her talks over 3 weeks, a book came into being, you may be familiar with it, called Choosing Simplicity. And this book addresses the Bhikshuni precepts. Interestingly enough, it's translated by our dear friend Venerable Jendi and edited by Venerable Chödrön. So Venerable Chödrön thought it would be great for me to go and meet Venerable Wu Yin and again ask for more teachings on the Vinaya. And it's always very good, I think, when you want to ask a teacher for teachings if it's done in person. So then that part of the trip started to get planned with the help of Venerable Jendi. Now I should admit that I was very, very naive and ignorant about Taiwan. I imagined that it would be just easy to travel around by myself. I thought it would be like a Japan or a Singapore where many, many people would know English. And that actually is not the case. So thanks to Venerable Jendi, she lined me up with all kinds of people to get me from point A to point B, and it was all very heavily planned with people who could speak English. And now in hindsight, I see that without those people, I would be still waiting at a train station, wondering where I was. And, you can imagine. So the initial part of getting me from the airport in Taiwan to the first temple was, you know what, I'm going to back up. I've just missed a crucial piece, and then I'm going to stop for today. Before I got to Taiwan, another idea of Venerable Chödrön's was that since Seattle is en route to Taiwan, I should go and stop at the DFF Dharma Center and give a talk or lead a discussion. So that was set up. And immediately I started getting these very friendly emails from a person by the name of Debbie Mahan, who I did not know. And she decided that I was going to be her project while I was in Seattle, which was very kind of her. I think she's a fairly new person to DFF and very keen about studying Buddhism and learning the Dharma. So she started corresponding with me and planning my day in Seattle. And she took her time off of work. And so that when I arrived in Seattle, she was there with Phong Kak, who's also a practitioner at DFF. And they took me into the city, and Debbie took me to a wonderful Vietnamese restaurant, and we had a really lovely time for the next several hours, sharing our life stories and talking about the Dharma. She then took me to her home, and I was able to sort of relax and just be quiet before the talk at DFF. And then I went to DFF to lead a discussion on my gratitude for the existence of DFF. And I invited everyone else to share how they got connected with DFF and what they feel grateful for. So this is a really great opportunity for me to reflect on how, without the existence of DFF, quite simply, I'll just say it like this: I would not be ordained. Because had DFF never come into being, Venerable Children would never have been the spiritual teacher there for 10 years in Seattle. My good friend Venerable Bhikshuni, who when I first met her, who was Barbara, was the person who introduced me to Venerable Children and DFF. So all that history, I'm certain, would not, without DFF, all of this path of learning the Buddhism simply would not have happened. So I have great gratitude for people that I don't even know who started DFF, who continued through the tough times, because Dharma centers and abbeys and monasteries always have, these rises and falls of, energy and people. And gosh, I can't imagine how my life would be having not met the Dharma. And it's due to DFF and Venerable Children. So I had this great opportunity of sharing my gratitude and hearing everyone else's stories about how they connected with DFF and eventually with Venerable Children and where we are now. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to stop here for today, and I'll continue with part 1 tomorrow of getting to Taiwan.